So I will just go ahead and get started introducing the event today, and then we will have our lovely reading and conversation with time for Q&A at the end. My name is Destiny Pinder-Buckley. I am a third-year nonfiction at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas for their MFA program. I'm here to introduce our event today, our BMI's 2024 to 2025 Shearing Fellow, Monica Macansantos with Sherry Lou C. Today joining us also as part of the Kwentuhan at Chikahan Filipino Book Club that Monica has been running for almost a whole year, which is amazing. First, I'd like to thank BMI's donors, Beverly Rogers, Miriam Shearing, and the Rogers Foundation. Please also, if you're available, join BMI on Friday, April 25th for The Sandbox, a Southwest Writers Exchange, a virtual reading. Free registration and full details are available at blackmountaininstitute.org. Now, let's introduce today's moderator. Monica Macansantos holds an MFA from the Michener Center at the University of Texas at Austin and a PhD from the International Institute of Modern Letters at the Victoria University of Wellington. She is the author of the forthcoming and almost exactly a month from today, essay collection, Returning to My Father's Kitchen, and the story collection, Love and Other Rituals. Her work has been recognized as notable in the Best American Essays in 2023, 2022, 2021, and 2016. She has received fellowships from Hedgebrook and the Kimmel Harding Nelson Center for the Arts, the iPark Foundation, and others. And our guest today is Sherry Lou C., who is a writer and playwright originally from the Philippines and currently based in Brooklyn, New York. She received her BA at the Gallatin School of Individualized Study at NYU and her MFA in playwriting from the Brooklyn College, where she has been an adjunct lecturer in English and American Study departments. Cherry is also a teacher with PEN America's Dreaming Out Loud. She has received fellowships and residencies from VONA, Tin House, and elsewhere. Love Can't Feed You is her debut novel. And now I will hand it over to all of you.
Right. I am grateful to have the opportunity to welcome Cherry Lucy to the Las Vegas community and the UNLV community. I'm grateful for her enthusiasm in joining my reading series, Kwentuhan at Chikahan, which is tied to, well, invisible labor and the immigrant experience for Filipino Americans. So join me in welcoming Cherry Lucy as she reads from her debut novel.
Thank you, Monica, for that intro. And I would like to thank you again for inviting me for your Chikahan, you know, this, and also to BMI for allowing this session. Um, Before I start, I would like to say that I've one of the ways I know I've become Americanized is the way how I pronounce my last name. So I know in the Philippines it's C, right? Because of how the Fujianese community pronounces it, but here it's become Sai, and then I've just kept it like that. So that's one of the ways I know that I guess I've changed, and it's so weird because I prefer that. Um,
Oh,
it
I've
gives
been
me
I've been saying Cherry Lucy.
it's fine, it's fine. And I purposely didn't say anything to you
All
before
right.
because I was curious about because it's been a while since I've heard that, right? Like pronounced that way. And one of I guess it's interesting to me, it feels a little bit like a relic from the past, even though I don't know. It's a journey for me. Anyway, again, just thank you though for everything. And it's interesting to hear that the way how that's pronounced. Anyway, so I'm gonna read a little bit from my book, everyone, called Love Can't Feed You. It came out last year, and it is the story about an immigrant family who joins their mom, who, as a nurse, came to New York like 5 years prior to, and the story is told from the point of view of the 17-year-old daughter, and it's about assimilation and how Um, Identities become forged and lost in that journey. So I'm going to read from the beginning. I am going to die. My body contracts the second the plane descends from 30,000 feet. I feel bile in my throat and grab another vomit bag. I think of the stories others will tell about me. Gone too soon. What a shame that she didn't get to live out her potential. This is not how anyone imagines arriving to America. Papa tells me to pray. My mouth forms Hail Marys, but the monster in my stomach shoves its way to my throat again. The queasiness possesses me with the violence and pins me to my seat as I lurch like the women from back home, the ones who thrash on the ground filled with the Holy Spirit. I should have given you the Dramamine, Papa says for the 10th time since we left Ninoy Aquino International Airport in Manila. Papa didn't let me eat anything he could save for later, the crumbly granola bars, foil wrapped biscuits, and even the hard dinner rolls. He pocketed the silverware too. He complains to the flight attendant and asks for more vomit bags since I have used mine, his, and even Junior's vomit bags. Junior sleeps soundly on the other side of Papa, his legs akimbo. A white woman next to me turns to her young companion and shakes her head. Her disgust pierces through my nausea. Never have children, she says. My ears pop, and the rest of her words blur. The plane rocks from the turbulence of November winds. My eyes roll to the back of my head. Can't you do something about your grandchild? The woman asks Papa. Papa apologizes to her, ashamed to say that I am not his grandchild, but his teenage daughter. How could he explain his silver hair to her? How could he explain that he fathered his first child, who has done nothing but stir trouble, at the age of 50? He says that I've been throwing up nonstop because he didn't give me Dramamine. How this is our first plane ride. How he should have known that this was like taking a long bus ride, only worse. He even tells the stranger that he would give me Dramamine as a 2-year-old to control the motion sickness, a sickness that made me a terrible travel companion when what he needed was a good girl who never made a fuss. The white woman softens a little and tells him how she learned from a Chinese herbalist that ginger is good for motion sickness and that he should be giving me ginger instead. She mentions that the herbalist helped her with many health issues, explaining the concept of hot and cold air in the body, the yin and yang. Aren't you Chinese? She asks him. Papa's tongue loosens and says yes, but not exactly Chinese. The woman's mouth makes an O. He tells her that his parents moved from China to the Philippines and that he was born and left in the hospital for 2 years because his parents couldn't afford to have another mouth to feed. What a shame, the woman says, then asks him if we are going to the US for a visit. Papa pauses. It feels like the same question the man from the embassy asked us a few months before. Papa tells her the story we all rehearsed before the interview to get our visas. That we're tourists visiting Ma, who's been in New York working as a nurse for the last 5 years. That we're going to see snow for the first time. That 5 years is long enough for a mother to go without seeing her family. What do you do? The woman asks. Business, Papa says. The little lies and the big lies all meld. He doesn't tell her about all the money he lost, how he bought wholesale rice the year when 3 Category 3 typhoons flooded the rice fields, along with the stockrooms that housed the harvested rice, or that his partner ran away with the money that was supposed to be used to pay off their creditors. He doesn't tell her about getting into the export business with an Australian man who fled after the big earthquake and left him with a storage house filled with giant, rotting wood carvings. He doesn't tell her that he wants to start fresh in America. He doesn't tell her about his plans for his son and daughter to go to American schools and have American lives, or that we bought round trip tickets for a one-way journey. This is inside talk that she doesn't need to hear. How long are you going to stay? She asks. We are on alert. Junior, whose eyes were closed a moment earlier, turns and looks at Papa. Even in my state, where every movement causes me discomfort, I sense danger and turn my head a little with my eyes closed. Papa slows down, careful not to give away too much, though he has given away so much already. Until the end of winter, he says, repeating the rehearsed words we said to the man in the gray suit at the embassy as he looked us over one by one, trying to gauge what was true and what was not. Junior asked Papa then, before the interview, if it's all right to lie, and Papa said yes, when you have to. The woman hails one of the flight attendants and clears her throat. Do you have Dramamine by any chance? She asks, pointing to me. The flight attendant, a thin young woman with long hair, looks at me and says in a low voice, We're not supposed to have it. Regulations, you know. Someone from across the aisle overhears her and fishes something out of her bag, a tube of Dramamine. She offers it to our neighbor. I forgot I had this. At this moment, I vomit again, and some of the bile gets on my t-shirt, jeans, and jacket, clothes from the last balikbayan box Ma sent in preparation for the trip. The strong, distinct scent of puke emanates from my mouth, all traces of food I've eaten on the plane from Manila to Japan, combined into a fermented sour mess. She may not be able to hold this down if she keeps throwing up like that, the woman who talked about yin and yang says, wrinkling her nose. None of these humiliations are enough, of course. My sanitary pad needed changing over 2 hours ago, but I don't dare get up to go to the bathroom. I can't anyway. My body defies me, and here I am, an animal sitting in her own bloody filth. Another jolt in the air, another wave of nausea. I reach for the vomit bag. I moan. Okay, I'll stop right there. Thank you. Oh, you're muted, Monica.
Sorry. Thank you for that wonderful reading, Perry. This was like what the chapter you just read was the subject of a very animated conversation in our book club where we discussed your book. Because I for one know so many people who tell the same experience of getting on a plane for the first time to immigrate to the States. And before that, they'd never been on a plane and they just weren't used to the motions of the plane. So like they just kept throwing up, and partly because like it's like a literal uprooting, right? So your body isn't used to it. So your body starts fighting this. And apart from that, what I loved about that section was how Queenie's relationship with her father becomes so clear to us so early on. Like he is he cares less about her discomfort, it appears, than like the embarrassment that she's creating with this white woman who like doesn't really care if she's like feeling nauseous or sick, but just doesn't like sees her as a nuisance, basically. So my first question has to do with Queenie because well she's not um a perfect character and she's not like the ideal young immigrant daughter that I guess many readers seek when reading immigrant fiction. Like she makes a lot of mistakes, she can be infuriating, she can hurt people too. And I just wanted to ask about your journey in creating Queenie and just like following this character along and like letting her grow.
Yeah, thank you, Monica, for that question. When I was creating Queenie, I guess I always go back to something that I've read from Toni Morrison, that if there is something that you want to read and you don't okay, I'm paraphrasing here. If there's something that you want to read and it's not out there, that you create it, you know? And so I guess Queenie, because she's also half Chinese and half Filipino like me, because I just didn't find anyone in literature who had that background, and so I thought, okay, then I'm going to create a character who is half Chinese and half Filipino, um, just so I could bounce off of not just my experiences, but people I know who have that specific mix, and also the specific mix of Filipino Chinese from the Philippines, because I've met Filipino and Chinese mixes, but the kind of Chinese mix they have, it's from a different from it's from a different situation, you know, and I feel that the experience that Chinese Filipinos have is just as specific to the Philippines, the overseas Chinese experience in Southeast Asia maybe, but specific to the Philippines. And then yeah, so in creating Queenie, I always thought about that sense of in-betweenness, you know, that sense of um sometimes being an observer rather than a participant because of not knowing where she should stand because of that uh, inability sometimes to state well who she is or where she's from, you know, and that people always also foisting identities already on her personhood. And also, I think girlhood, you know, and the idea of becoming a woman, that's always something that I'm interested in, you know, regardless of ethnic background, because most of the time across the spectrum, I see so many similarities from different places. So I was very interested in that in the development of Queenie because at some point when I was writing this novel, there was a 5-year-old Queenie, you know, and then I became really interested in the particular. So in the book, it's covered from 17 to 23. So I became very interested in this age range as a coming of age for Queenie.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's like so interesting because that's like a time in our lives, especially as women, when we're like on the cusp of adulthood and like especially when you're in your early 20s, you feel that you've gotten to a certain point where you can speak with authority. And of course, Queenie is like isn't exactly like that. Um, but like she's like still figuring things out, so like she has some authority and she has like enough power to like possibly hurt people, but at the same time she's like she doesn't really know the world enough, and at the same time this is like she's been thrown into a vastly different world from what she's familiar with. So on the topic of girlhood, I wanted to ask like what other novels or like works of literature you've read to well that like deal with the topic of girlhood and like which may have influenced you on this journey.
Yeah, so I mean, there is one book I always talk about because it was actually the book that got me thinking about this situation with Queenie and the triangle with her parents, and that is The Lover by Marguerite Duras. And for those who are unfamiliar with the book, it's written by this French colonial woman who was born and raised in French Indochina. So this was a while ago, and she grew up poor. Her family, even though they were white, they were considered white trash in colonial Indochina because the father died, the mother went crazy. She had 4 children, I believe it's four children, including the daughter who is the protagonist, who is Marguerite, because it's supposed to be like semi, it's an autobiographical fiction or a memoir. Apparently, the French don't
Maybe
make those.
autofiction.
Yeah, they don't really make those distinctions. Anyway, so at 15 years old, she um, catches the eye of this 27-year-old rich Chinese man in this society, and they start a taboo relationship, you know, and everyone looks down on her because of this affair, but and even her own family looks down on her because of this affair, but it's this affair that actually puts food on their table, you know? So it made me think about, oh, okay, this is fascinating. I'd never, at that point, when I first read The Lover, I'd never read a Chinese or even an Asian male as the love interest who was seen as powerful, mysterious, and all of this. And I'd never seen, I guess, a French white woman be on the receiving end of that, because every time I think about um powerful men and young women, it's usually, and especially set in Asia, it's gonna be like a Miss Saigon story, where you
Yeah.
have a white savior and the Asian princess that needs to be saved, right? But this one was so different, and of course, it was tragic, but in a different way, and she was coming into her womanhood, and obviously some people might say, "Oh my gosh, it's grooming," and all of that, but I kept thinking that times before were different than the way how we see things now. And not that I'm excusing that relationship between a 15-year-old and a 27-year-old, but it made me think that these things were the norm before. I mean, I recently thought about my own grandparents from both sides. Both grandparents, I think, married before they were 15 or 14. So in that generation, that time, that was fairly common. So this book really impacted me in the way how I thought about Queenie and that relationship, and it's just something that I'm constantly returning to in my head. The other book that I would say influenced me too, although the age difference is there, it's not the same age as Days of Abandonment by Elena Ferrante. And that one is completely different because it's the story of a woman whose husband leaves her for a younger woman, and she just has a complete meltdown, you know? And I was just so fascinated by the way how she becomes this unhinged woman, that poor woman who's left by the husband. And I became so curious and enamored by that idea, because I had seen this also played a lot. I mean, in a lot of teledramas that I watched in the Philippines, and just people or stories I've heard growing up, things like that, that part of the experience of growing up, specifically in developing nations that are religious, is the virtue of the woman, and that is tied to girlhood, that is tied to the worth and value of the girl, that if you do not have that purity, or that your grace intact, that you are nothing, that you are garbage, like all of this stuff. And that uh really got to me, that, so what is the idea of becoming a woman when you are switching societies from one that is uh religious and intolerant of that, versus the other one, which has a more liberal, I mean, in some landscapes, more liberal approach to sexuality, to womanhood or girlhood, or that transition between the two. So those were journeys I was interested in.
Thank you for that. That's like such an intriguing response. And I also read The Lover in graduate school. I love Elena Ferrante, but I haven't read that book, but I will get to it because of your suggestion. But what I loved about The Lover was how much agency this girl had. Like, I guess in our contemporary moment, we would see this character as a victim of sorts, because she, like a victim who's being taken advantage of by this much older man. But she well, within her limited powers and within her limited experience of the world, she takes charge somehow. And like even the act of writing a book is a means to take charge of that experience. What I also loved about The Lover is how both these characters, this poor white French girl who kind of like reminds me of um Camus in Nigeria, in like Algeria, and like being a French person, like belonging to the colonial class in like a French colony while also being poor and lacking in like advantages. So you have this girl, and then she also becomes like an outcast even further within her own community and the larger community by being very sexually active. And then you also have this older Chinese man who is also, I believe, like, well, he belongs to a cultural minority in, I think it's Vietnam. And he's also like, because the Chinese, like these um all these like countries in Southeast Asia have like Chinese minority communities, and they're known to like, because they're good with business, like they have some privilege, but at the same time they're outcasts and they've been subject to purges too. And that's like the case too in the Philippines, because the Chinese are like seen as, well, privileged, but at the same time very much hated, and like
Oh,
the
I know.
subliminal and yeah. So I wanted to ask about, well, like how, like since you've touched on this already in one of your responses about like writing about the Chinese Filipino experience, and how like this possibly speaks to, well, other like literature written by Chinese Filipino authors, like an example that I can cite, like somebody who was like published in America recently was Nathan Go, who wrote a novel titled Forgiving Imelda Marcos. Like I don't know about that title, but anyway. And then like there are people like Charlton Ong and Linda T. Casper. I was just curious about navigating that space of like being a minority in a culture like Filipino culture that becomes a minority when we all immigrate to America, and which, and like then the Chinese Filipino experience when like transposed to America is isn't like written about as much. So like that's like a sloppy question, but like I just wanted to.
No, I get where you're coming from
Yeah.
because even so, full disclosure, the writers and books that you've mentioned who have that similar background to me, I have not read their books. I've heard of them, but I've not gotten the chance to. Uh, One day I'll get to them. It's just there are so many books, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes we read to what is I don't want to say just popular, right? It's just that the conversations, for example, in literary circles, you need to be current with them, and that's what you end up reading, right? And it made me think also about colonialism a lot because um, I think about value system in literature, and for example, in the Philippines, because we do come from heavily colonized upbringing. Everything we know is just from centuries of colonialism, and it's only been recent that the Philippines, as we know, is a republic upon itself. But even then, I question that, because it's still, for all intents and purposes, an American de facto colony, which right now maybe China wants to take the Spratly Islands and what have you. And I say that because in the beginning I was thinking, oh, maybe it's not quite true, but in the publishing journey, as I was looking, I mean, as I was just starting to get enmeshed with the publication journey, one of the ways in which I saw how the Philippines, and again, not just the Philippines, but a lot of formerly colonized countries, how we still um, hold on to that colonial structure, even though we're allegedly post-colonial, is that we keep them. Those are, so I look at the political system. We have a presidential system as opposed to another kind of system because that's what we inherited from the Americans, right? And then the other thing, specifically from publication, I get back to it, which really bothered me, was North American rights included the Philippines. So
Yeah.
North American rights for a book included the Philippines. And I asked everybody why. No one could give me an answer. And, someone said to me, and, I mean, of course I know the answer, but I wanted someone to say it. And the answer that one of the other writers I had met, who was also a debut author from last year, is that, oh, because Philippines was a colony, and of course they're going to keep that. And if you look at, well, what is the Commonwealth? And that's, all of England and all of England's former colonies, right? So that would include parts of like what, Australia, the Caribbean, was it Africa too? I don't recall exactly, because I'm just talking right now from what I remember. I was just so bothered by all of this that um I'm still thinking about it. Like, I want to write about
Mhm.
that, and how this is a relic of that, and of that colonialism, and we're still participating in it. Um
Yeah.
so I don't know. I don't know. That it's
Mhm.
sort of this long-winded answer about how it's complicated, this idea of identity for me, just because I've had to think about it from the beginning, even in the Philippines. Because, I mean, you were saying about people, the Chinese being admired and hated. I grew up with that. That was my reality. I had in fifth grade one kid telling me that your people, the Chinese, destroyed our economy and stole our money. And he was putting it all on me, because I was representative. And of course,
Yeah, it's like your people as if you're not Filipino.
yeah, yeah. And so it was very confusing for me. Being in the Philippines, thinking that I'm Chinese because that's how everybody looked at me, and how, even though I don't speak Chinese, my dad didn't learn, or he did, but he didn't teach it to us. And then having that identity, and then coming to the United States, and suddenly that's wrested from me because I don't speak it. I don't really look it. Like, I've gotten so many things from people like, "What are you?" I've been followed by people to ask me what I am. I've been stopped at the grocery store to be
What?
asked what I am. So it's an interesting experience, right? In terms of this. And so I guess when I became more serious with this idea of literature as a pursuit of, I guess, excavating all this, I decided that, okay, then I should choose this particular topic that bothers me, and that is that Chinese Filipino experience, and how also being uh, an overseas Chinese, that's the other name I would have, and then being also part of the Filipino diaspora, like how that all impacts the way how I am received and how I receive the world. So I had purposely made that transition to write about that, because otherwise I don't think there's anything else interesting about my view, because other people can write about those things. The only thing unique about my perspective is that, because that is what I had seen.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm interested in what you said about the Philippines being a neo colony of the US because, as it's pointed out in the book, it's as if the economy of the Philippines is made to produce people who go abroad. Queenie's mother is a nurse to send remittances back home, and sometimes it's drilled into like it. I mean, in my case, it wasn't, but for many young Filipinos, it's drilled into them that you have to get a job that will enable you to go abroad and either send home money or bring your family with you. And um, that brings me to the topic of immigration and how Filipinos assume a different identity when they come to the US or when they come to other first world countries. And like there's that like very intriguing title which I love about your book too, Love Can't Feed You, because it's a riff on this expression that's become widespread in the Filipino diaspora. It's all about swallowing your pride so that you can survive and advance in life. But in like what happens is that it creates a lot of problems, right? Because like how much pride can you swallow before like you yourself get swallowed whole? And like just the title Love Can't Feed You, because like these people swallow their pride and they become very much like unaware of the needs of the people around them. So like this family slowly falls apart, right? So like they become incapable of loving because they just become incapable of understanding like the disappointments, the sorrows of the people who are closest to them. So I wondered if you wanted to talk about that, like the title and what you feel about all of all of what I've just said.
Yeah, oh my gosh. There's so many toxic traits. I mean, there's a lot of great traits that the Filipino culture has, but there's also so many toxic traits. So you mentioned about swallowing your pride.
Mhm.
Yeah, that is a big one that I've encountered. And there's another one that I think about often, which is probably why that idea of remittances where you send money, so you're the OFW, you're the overseas Filipino worker, and then you send money back home, and not just to sometimes your family, it's the whole village,
Mhm.
and that is utang na loob, it's like this debt of gratitude or debt. It's this idea of debt that you owe your whole being to, I don't know, this idea of ancestors or origin or whatever, and in some ways, like, I get that, but in some ways it's also been the albatross in people's necks, that they swallow their pride because they want to keep face or save face that they are that they're giving back to the community or something like that, because they need to feel good, that and to be seen good, that they're the good person or the good provider or what have you. I mean, and sometimes I mean, how many stories have I read or heard of OFWs who are basically the milking cows of their relatives back in the Philippines, and if they didn't send the money on time, or if it's not as much as they could send, sometimes they're cursed out, like, you're living the lap of luxury and you're not giving us money, like, how dare you, so these are stories I've heard all the time. So going to that other question about the title, Love Can't Feed You. So that's specifically a saying that the mom character says in the novel to her daughter, Queenie. And that is specifically about how you should marry someone who could, feed you, basically. So you can't marry someone you just love if that person can't provide for you. The other meaning is that you should take something that is going to feed you, So in this case, nursing, right? Like, if you want to be an artist, no, you can't be an artist because that's not going to feed you. The thing that you love, that's not going to feed you. So that you have to be practical. So it's working along those two lines of thought, and then yeah, people, it's just so fascinating to me because there's this Facebook group, Meta group. When I was announcing my book last year in my neighborhood, there was a stranger who wrote back to me and said that the title reminded her of her eighth grade class where they were being taught by a nun in a Catholic school. And the nun had asked the students, what would you choose, love or money? Okay. And then when
God.
when you marry eighth graders, right? Why would I not be
God.
asking this question? So she said everybody in the class said love, okay, except this one student. It was a boy, and she said, and the nun asked, well, why, right? And then the boy said, because, well, and it was a different phrasing, but it was because love don't feed you, okay? So it um jolted her memory reading that title, and I've spoken to other folks from different places like the Caribbean, and they also have a similar saying from the adults that love don't feed you, or something similar. So I see that there's something of a similarity between certain cultures, I guess, that where caregiving, so that's another thing, where caregiving is exported, that
Mm,
it is something that you pay for. And then the ones who are left behind, the actual family of the caregivers, they're not receiving that. They're receiving money.
yeah.
So it's again operating along those lines.
Yeah, that like ties in with your characterization of Queenie's mother, who's like so cold and incapable of love. And ironically, she's a nurse. And
Yeah.
nurses are like supposed to have a good bedside manner. They're supposed to care. Like doctors aren't supposed to care. Or like they can, but it's the nurses who are like more like involved with their patients. But like at the same time, like with her profession, like it's care commodified. So what
Yeah.
happens is that everything's commodified. Even love becomes like something that you can sell, right? And it just like makes me think about how, like, I guess in the end, like, well, it ties in with capitalism, I guess, how in the end, like, this all dehumanizes us. Like when we learn to commodify everything, we become less than human, and we become incapable of love, I guess. That's my
Yeah.
interpretation, yeah, of your book.
No, I mean, yeah, and I tried to write the book in a way that people would have their own interpretation. Not everybody likes that approach, because people
Mhm.
like being told what to what to experience. But anyway, as far as some reviews from readers that I had gotten to, one of the interesting things that I thought about as we were talking, Monica. So I had a friend. I say had in the past tense because I don't know if we're friends anymore. I don't think so. So it's this woman who's white. She's Polish, an immigrant, and she actually criticized the way how I wrote about the Filipino community. She said, "Why are you writing them, okay, in such a negative light? Aren't you afraid that they're going to criticize you because you're making them look bad, like the mother or the culture, or what have you, specifically because I'm focusing on that transactional quality of some of the relationships, and then it made me really question this idea of, well, that's interesting because I'm also Filipino, right? Even though I'm half. And why are you, like I asked her this, well, so why are you separating their experience from what I have experienced or what I have seen? Why does it have to be positive? Why does it have to be only a certain way to make your idea of a people only the way how you see it, so that's something that I was thinking about a lot.
Right. Yeah, great. Thank you for that, those wonderful responses. So we have a few more minutes for Q&A. And if you have any questions for Cherry Lou, feel free to drop them into the chat. So Joshua at BMI has a question. I enjoyed Cherry Lou's piece in LitHub, Who Decides What Asian American Literature Is? I'm curious to know how you both, Cherry Lou and Monica, categorize your work and how confining or directive those categories may be.
Monica, you wanna go
Oh my
first?
God, you go first. Like this is your event.
Um, fine. So I think of my work both as Asian American, or right now it's what the acronyms are always changing. So it was Asian American, Asian Pacific American, Asian American Pacific Islander, but apparently now it's Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander. Anyway, so I feel like I'm in that part, but also, of course, I'm also in the Filipino American literature. And some people may question this, but I also consider my work as part of the overseas Chinese diaspora work, because it also deals with that. And of course, immigration literature, coming of age. There's all these categories that people can think of, that some may even push back against, because they will think that it's not, it's more this, it's that, and what have you. And at the end of the day, for me, I wrote what I wrote and hope that it impacts the reader, and that not just today but later on, and that people look at it and say that, okay, there's something about this that I'm going to come back to, because it's speaking on a contemporary issue. Um, yeah, that's what I have. And thank you for reading that Lit Hub essay, Joshua.
Yeah, thank you too, Josh. In my case, I'm going to quote my friend and fellow shearing fellow Alejandro Heredia, who said that these um, labels are meant to sell books, and they don't necessarily encapsulate what we want to do as artists. So in my case, I write about what I know because this is what I feel I have authority to speak about, which is the Filipino experience. So, like, my characters are Filipino, and I will sometimes write stories about Filipinos in the diaspora, both in the US and in New Zealand, where I've lived. So, but other than that, like, I want to speak to the human experience. And I guess all writers, regardless of nationality or ethnicity, feel this way as well. So I guess this is Destiny's question. Can Cherry talk about her process writing fiction versus writing plays or scripts?
Thank you for that question. So, as some of you may or may not know, I'm also a playwright, and the process is coming from a similar place, but I guess it's then the story itself, whether it demands from me that it become a play, although lately I've been focusing more on prose writing. So in the beginning, I was trying to be an actress when I was younger, when I was in my uh late teens, early 20s, and then I discovered through that process that it's very difficult for me to be reduced into something, which happens when you're auditioning or when you're going for these, I don't know, for acting in general, because you're actually sometimes leaning on a stereotype, and sometimes that was very hard for me, because I already had such an issue with my cultural identity. And like, I remember there was one time I went to an audition for something else, and then somebody downstairs in the lobby in a building in the city was looking at me and saying, "Oh, are you here for this other audition?" And I said, "Oh, no, but what is it?" Apparently it was for a Latin American audition, for someone who could play Mexican. So, folks, apparently I could play Mexican. So there was a lot of that. And then yeah, I don't like reductivism, I guess. So I ended up transitioning out of acting into the writing end. So of course, obviously, I was writing plays as a response, and then I also had an interest in prose writing. And then during the pandemic, I really leaned into prose writing because there was no theater. Zoom theater was terrible. And specifically about the process, again, I find that the two of them work hand in hand and in tandem because uh, usually in a play you need stakes, you need drama, you need something that compels the page to turn, or the two characters, what do they want? And it's the same thing in prose. You need some kind of, I don't want to say conflict, but I mean, I guess it is conflict, something that turns the page, something that there is some type of want or need or desire that needs to be there. And then the two of them in prose writing, playwriting, I mean, even in nonfiction, I would say, even though I'm not that great at essay writing, um, there needs to be a compulsion to keep going, keep reading, and keep exploring. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, that reminds me of what one of my classmates at the Michener Center, who was a playwriting major, said, like, whenever me or like another friend from the fiction cohort were trying to figure out our lives, like, what's at stake? Like, what do you want? I'm such a playwright. Anyway, I have my own question. So you talked about acting. Do you think that your background in acting has like translated into your like fiction writing?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Because when you're an actor, when you're a performer, you're very oriented towards your body and the experience of the body. And I feel that a lot of my writing also exhibits that, and that permeates through a lot of things that I'm interested in as well. So how does the body experience XYZ? How are the senses involved? What what is the way that, let's say, sometimes when I write, I think about things like, oh, what are the ways in which my skin my skin as the character, my skin is involved in this scene, so you have those types of, well, I at least have those visualizations. So sometimes I will see a character or feel a character doing specific things, and sometimes certain acting exercises from the past sort of rear their head into some of the prose stuff that I'm doing.
That's a great response. Thank you. So, we are about to end, and is there anything else you'd like to add to this wonderful conversation?
Yeah, I I'm so interested in the idea of realistic fiction, because I'm not really this is the funny thing, right? I'm actually an experimental writer, and this book was my novel was my attempt at doing something that was not as experimental. But I'm writing another book, and that is super experimental. So yeah, I don't know. Hopefully I finish soon, and that it also comes out in the world whenever that is. But it's something that I'm thinking about a lot, and narratives and bodies and stories we tell ourselves and each other. So those are just things that I'm thinking of, and how how are we going to survive without stories? That's just
Yeah.
where I'm going to end with that.
Yeah, that's like one thing I really liked about your work, how embodied it was right from the beginning, with Queenie throwing up and her body rebelling against this uprooting. And also like I could also like see the other characters like very well. So like yeah, and anyway, thank you, Cherry, for this wonderful talk. thank you to everyone who came, and thank you to the Black Mountain Institute for hosting this event and supporting my reading series. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.